Wright Report. Hey, good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wright Report, the Daily News Podcast. I got three briefs for you this morning that are shaping America and the world. First up, President Trump says he cannot predict whether or not the U.S. economy will enter into a recession this year. Look up the latest economic data on what is hedging his bets. Plus, how his plan to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry gives us a pretty good sense of what is to come for this economy. Second, we got updates on a possible billion-dollar scam benefiting the Democrat Party. It's all connected to the trillion-dollar bill that was behind the Biden green energy deal. Third, the AI revolution is helping the White House plans to throw Palestinian agitators this morning and throw them out of the country. Cover that, along with some investigations of U.S. citizens who were caught spying for China, 3 of them, and all U.S. soldiers. Later, we will close out the podcast this morning with something new, a tease, a fun new way to kick off our Monday episodes, highlighting news that we will probably cover this week, including a great update this morning out of Missouri that could help us to combat China. Before we get to that, let's get to our top story of the morning. President Trump expressing uncertainty yesterday about whether the U.S. economy will enter into a recession this year. Fox News interviewed the president yesterday and asked if he is expecting a recession, to which he said this, quote, "I hate to predict things like that, but there is going to be a period of transition because what we are doing is very big. It takes a little bit of time, but I think that my plan should be great for us," end quote. When he was then asked about whether that might explain the stock market's recent declines, he brushed that aside, saying, "No, quote, you can't really watch the stock market. You can't go by that. You have to do what's right," end quote. In other words, the president is admitting this morning that we are in for a bumpy economic ride for, well, the next little while, as he, of course, works to reorient America's economy away from government spending and put it back into the private sector. On Friday, we got a slew of economic data that confirmed that, we're probably already in some pretty nasty economic waters, especially the working class. Bloomberg News, Morningstar, and MarketWatch reported that the U.S. jobs numbers came out on Friday, showing modestly good news, at least on the top line figure, with at least 150,000 or so jobs created in February. But looking under the hood, things are a little bit more complicated. On the good side, America added 10,000 new jobs in manufacturing. That is a notable increase from the past year, certainly under Joe Biden. Another big increase in jobs was for Americans who are native born. So a quick refresh on this issue. We know that about 90% of job growth during the Joe Biden era went to foreigners, either legal immigrants or illegal aliens. That number just went into reverse. In Mr. Trump's first full month in office, native-born Americans outpaced the foreign-born in terms of getting new jobs by tens and tens of thousands. So that is the good news overall, more good jobs for more Americans. However, there were notes of alarm in Friday's data. Let's start with the U6 unemployment rate. Listeners might recall that is the number that I watch very closely because in my view, it includes not only the total number of unemployed people in this country, but also those who are discouraged and have quit the workforce, and those who would really like a full-time job, but just can't find it. So that number, the U6 rate, that shot up last month by half a point to 8%. Unfortunately, that remains a very stubborn data point. We've talked about this for at least the past year or two. America's working class continues to very much struggle, as they have for, not just 2 years, but 4. In fact, Axios News is reporting that more subprime borrowers in this country are falling behind on their car payments and at record rates, highest in about 3 years. That is also showing up in the retail industry. Washington Post and Reuters said last week that retailers like Target, Walmart, Ross, and Macy's, they are all expecting a pretty tough 2025 with consumers pulling back. Now, as I shared on Friday, President Trump and his Treasury Secretary, Mr. Bessent, they know that's true. They continue to say, we have a plan. Or as President Trump said on Fox News yesterday, we've got to revive the manufacturing base especially. And to that end, we have this next big update on how he plans to do it, at least for one sector. Axios News reports that President Trump is up at 3 a.m. every night texting and calling executives in America's shipbuilding industry. There is a good reason for why he is doing that. It is in very, very bad shape. To understand how bad, consider this. At the end of the Second World War, the United States had the largest fleet of vessels around the world. This is for both our Navy and our merchant marines. In fact, ships made in the USA carry about 60% of all American trade. Over the past 75 years, that number has been reduced to nearly zero. As the Congressional Research Service reports, most all-American shipyards closed down starting in the 1950s to the 1990s. The Japanese and the South Koreans then took over. Then, in the early 2000s, China started to dominate the industry, as the AFP and Newsmax report. Beijing now vastly outproduces the United States, cranking out thousands of ships per year, compared to America's 1 or maybe 5 ships max per year. All in, China now controls about 50% of the global shipbuilding industry. South Korea and Japan have about 40% combined, and America, we have less than 1%. Making matters worse, the couple of ships that we do build per year, mostly for the U.S. military, are kind of a wreck. So, for example, we know that the U.S. Navy launched an investigation last fall into some really bad welding that apparently affected 26 ships that were built at a shipyard in Virginia. It appears that one single worker intentionally did some very poor welds for reasons that aren't clear. And that is why U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz told NBC News recently that U.S. shipbuilding in general and U.S. repair yards specifically are quote, an absolute mess, with Congress spending over $10 billion since 2014 trying to fix this problem, but not much of anything has been fixed. So that is why Axios News is reporting this morning that President Trump is up until the hours of every day making calls and sending texts. He's got a 4-point strategy to try to fix or address this, including the following. First, he understands that we have to work with the South Koreans and the Japanese. As the Wall Street Journal reports, we are in such a bad state that we are going to need to lean on those two nations. Perhaps they will buy or partner with our remaining shipyards and bring in some various new management teams and skills and technology to basically rebuild us from scratch. In fact, that is already starting to happen at the shipyard in Philadelphia in partnership with the South Koreans. Second, we are going to need to use tariffs and especially fees on foreign vessels to push cargo companies to use the dwindling number of U.S.-made ships to move our goods in and out of the country. Third, Congress is going to need to spend a lot of money on both direct subsidies and tax credits to try to support or protect the shipping companies that we eventually start to build. Fourth, and finally, Reuters News is reporting that Mr. Trump is setting up a team inside of the White House to focus on this issue of shipbuilding. He wants a dedicated team that just bird-dogs this and ultimately creates the jobs for the working class. And that 4-point plan, however, has some really important critics. So, for example, shipping companies. They warn the fees that Mr. Trump wants to slap on these foreign or Chinese-made vessels. Those fees will get passed down to the buyers of the cargo goods, like the retailers, and then probably you, hitting your pocketbook. The Wall Street Journal reports that's because the White House is considering a fee of about $1.5 million per foreign ship or Chinese ship. That pencils out to about $3,000 per 40-foot container, roughly speaking. So that fee then would probably get passed down to you, in part or in whole. But then again, the White House says that the shipping companies, they can always choose the made in the USA ships, as few of those as there might be, because if they do, they'll get a rebate of $1 million per ship. In any case, President Trump is still debating the fee structure. He's probably going to have to make a decision later this month, around the 24th of March. And he is aware that no matter the option that he chooses, there's no easy choice. He's got to help rebuild an industry that has not been in this terrible of a shape since well before the 1930s. That takes us back to the beginning of this segment when President Trump spoke to Fox News yesterday about the possibility of a recession. As he said, quote, "I hate to predict things like that. There is going to be a period of transition because what we are doing is very big. It takes a little bit of time. But I think my plan should be great for us. You can't go watch the stock market. You can't go by that. You have to do what's right." End quote. With those facts and data, let's now pivot to some analysis and opinion. And let's step back in time 50 to 75 years But now we are heading into an iceberg. We are not already nicking that thing in the hole. So to change that fate, President Trump is using fees and tariffs and tax credits and, yeah, okay, some bullying of some foreign nations to spin the captain's wheel as fast as we possibly can in a new direction. Otherwise, what the data show is that we're going to see it like this, government like spending and an economy. It's like Argentina or Greece. Folks remember back in 2010, that was a disaster. And yet, as much as that is true, and the data show that it is true, I shared this morning that a lot of people on our national ship this morning, they're suffering. The working class is really suffering. And as we pull correctly and hard on the economic wheel of this ship to right ourselves, the working class is likely to get hurt even more. They are already loaded up with credit card debt. They are struggling to make car and insurance payments. They are coming up short on mortgages, and they're pulling back on consumer spending. The political question then is whether or how long those folk can hold on. As we'll recall, the working class is a vital part of Trump's coalition. So how long will they hold on politically and support him, even if they're economically struggling? Well, we got part of the answer to that over the weekend. The United Auto Workers Union said that President Trump is right, and that now is the time to throw out global trade as we have known it for the past 50 plus years. It is time to use things like tariffs to reshore our industrial base for the working class. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the big economic picture this morning. In a nutshell, we've got President Trump, who's acting as America's salty captain at the helm, and as he is barking orders, sometimes nicely, sometimes not so nicely, he's earnestly trying to make this country great. And if we are honest, he's pushing us through some American ship that, quite frankly, is beautiful, it's mighty and glorious, but it's seen better days. So let's see what we can do and how long the American passengers on board this morning, especially the working class, can stick with him in his economic vision, even if they are struggling. And with that, let's take our first break of the morning. We'll be right back. It's a St. Patrick's Day spring sale this week at GhostBed.com. They've got you covered with 50% off of everything that you need, like mattresses. I've got the Lux model. They've got the hybrid or a lot of others. Gorgeous set of pop-over mattress to purchase when you do.
State Park.
Politico magazine and New York Sun Stick News. As President Trump tries to revive the nation's private sector, he and his team are trying to claw back billions and billions of dollars in government spending. That is making some nonprofit organizations very angry this morning. Politico magazine and the New York Sun report that a coalition of climate nonprofits are now suing the White House and his administration to get access to a $27 billion fund that currently sits at Citibank. We covered this initially back on February 27th, but to refresh our memories, a few years ago, the White House got Congress to authorize $1 trillion, give or take, for a new Green Deal that had all kinds of cash for all sorts of climate change-related efforts. As Reuters News reported in early February, President Trump's EPA chief, Mr. Lee Zeldin, announced that he was going to try to claw back about $3 billion of that funding, saying that he had the authority to do it first, but more importantly, he believes that the cash represents billions of dollars in fraud. He says that the money is largely, not exclusively, for the benefit of the Democrat Party, Democrat politicians, and their party faithful. In response, Democrats have all ridiculed Mr. Zeldin, insisting that he has absolutely no evidence for his claims, and to just hurry up and cut the checks. And that takes us to the weekend's news. One of the climate groups that sued on Saturday is named Climate United. They are asking the D.C. court to issue an injunction. It would do two very important things. First, it would order Citibank to disperse the billions of dollars that they say are owed. Second, it would also prohibit Mr. Zeldin and the EPA from interfering with future cash payments. The Trump EPA has noted that the DOJ is investigating these disbursements in this Citibank account, and they need more time. As always, the climate NGOs or nonprofits say that is just absurd, and please cut the checks. So I will keep you posted on what this DC court decides. We would expect an appeal either way. With those who facts and data, let's now pivot to some analysis and opinion. This is so great. We've got to take a look at this group called Climate United. So we can take a quick scan of whose leadership is on board. I wanted to understand if Mr. Zeldin's claims for some benefits and even just a whiff of possible good. So here's what I found. By using OpenSecrets.org, I can check each person's history of political giving, give us a hint of things, and I found that the CEO Democrat politicians themselves. In other words, in at least this organization's case, Joe Biden's billions went to a Democrat-run group who in turn gave cash back to the party and or to fellow partisans. Now, we should also know this morning that that is not an isolated event with this Biden green energy cash where it's going. We also know of another plan this morning. It is called Power Forward Communities. This Fox News and the fact-checker Snopes will report. This, I gotta tell you, is bizarre. Back in 2023, this group started with basically zero revenue. It was $100. The next year, in 2024, they got $2 billion from the Biden White House regarding this green energy cash. This group is called Power Forward Communities. It was led and is led by Miss Stacey Abrams. She's a Democrat who ran for Georgia's governorship and twice lost. She went on MSNBC over the weekend to defend the $2 billion in cash, saying that she used the money to help people in a very small Georgia town to buy some energy-efficient appliances like stoves and microwaves. Well, that expenditure, $2 billion, or roughly $20 billion that Mr. Zeldin wants to claw back, that cash is very much now under investigation this morning by the state of Georgia and DOJ. Should it be, based on what I've just presented? Well, to me, it stinks. And I'm not talking about like a field of petunias this morning. This is a rank stank. And the facts as we know them suggest that we are looking at the very definition of a kleptocracy. At any rate, I'll keep you posted on the related investigations. I'm feeling that this could be quite important for not just the partisans, but really the country. Speaking of important investigations for the country this morning, we got another one to talk about. Axios News reports that the U.S. State Department is using artificial intelligence to identify pro-Palestinian agitators on social media and checking to see if they are in
Crossing over. Entering Utah.
and if their investigations reveal that they have engaged in violent or unlawful behavior, they are going to be deported. Axios News shared that this effort involves the State Department, their Word document, but also, quote, other government agencies from the Delta, who that might be. But we may have our first arrest. ABC News reports that a Mr. Mohammed Khalil was arrested over the weekend at his campus apartment at Columbia University. He is a well-known radical Palestinian activist and a former student of Columbia University. He is also not an American. His attorney says that Mr. Khalil was arrested based on a State Department order that revoked his visa. He then protested that actually he has a green card. ICE officers said, nope, sorry, that was revoked as well. He now faces deportation back to Gaza or the West Bank. It appears. We'll get some confirmation on that. His attorney, in any case, is outraged. She said, quote, this is a clear escalation. The Trump administration is following through on their threats, end quote. Well, yes, they are. The arrest of this Palestinian, by the way, came just one day after the Trump White House announced that they would cancel about $400 million in grants to Columbia University for failing to stop the rampant anti-Semitism that has plagued that campus for the past couple of years. Pivoting now to some analysis and opinion, I'd offer you two things to think about and reflect on this morning. The first is this very interesting use of AI. So what I would guess is that the State Department and other government agencies are searching social media, probably using an AI facial recognition tool, combining that with an AI tool that's looking for all the text on social media, with then AI making a preliminary call of some possible suspects of these various Palestinian agitators. So that's very, very interesting. Second, let's talk about a connection this morning. This is quite something between these Palestinian radicals and the EPA cash that we just covered a couple minutes ago, because this is the most interesting piece of news this morning. So here's the background. About a year ago, you may remember my brief to you when we covered the various campus protests that were breaking out all across this country. I mentioned that there were a number of groups, especially in the New York and New Jersey area. They were helping with the funding of the protests, but oddly, they were climate groups. And one was called the Climate Justice Alliance. Now, that group was supposed to get a $50 million grant from the EPA. That is until a U.S. Senator and others flagged how much of that climate cash was actually going to other unrelated leftist political causes like Palestinian liberation. So again, I go back to what we talked about regarding Mr. Zeldin and his belief that the $27 billion in Citibank is probably just a slush fund for Democrats and their causes. Well, the data, experiences we were talking about this morning seem to back him up. The Biden administration turned at least the EPA, not other federal agencies, into a set of money laundering outfits. Now that is clearly speculation. it is so vital that the Department of Justice investigate this and get the facts. In the meantime, let us offer a hat tip to Secretary Rubio of the State Department for at least this arrest of Mr. Khalil. They cross-breed him, drop him off, I don't know where, maybe in a Bravo, put him on a rowboat, take him off in Gaza. Either way, I suspect he will be greeted with open arms. We wish him all the best. Speaking of people who are up to no good, we have got three traitors to talk about this morning, and it is sparking a much bigger debate and conversation about what it means to be an American. The Hill and the Oregonian newspaper report two active duty U.S. Army soldiers plus a recently separated veteran have been arrested and charged with selling secrets to China. Mr. Jian Zhao and Mr. Li Tian were arrested at Joint Base Lewis McChord on Thursday. Meanwhile, their collaborator, Mr. Raoul Duan, a former U.S. soldier, he was arrested as well. The three were working together to give or sell classified information to China, which, as their names might suggest, was their home country. Mr. Duan and Mr. Tian went to university together in China, becoming intrigued by a U.S. military program called NAVME. That program began under President George Bush, along with Atkins, an immigration lawyer in his administration, who wanted to draw people from foreign nations around the world to serve in the U.S. military. And here's how it worked. If they could demonstrate a unique skill, like a foreign language fluency, they could obtain U.S. citizenship if they served in the U.S. military for 3 years. That program, starting in 2008, lasted until 2016, but Mr. Zhao and Tian and Duan snuck through, having absolutely no love or affinity for the United States. In fact, they had some very quiet allegiances to China, obviously. Those men, by the way, have been giving Beijing secrets about the U.S. Army's Bradley and Stryker vehicles, along with our HIMARS system. Pivoting now to analysis and opinion, let's use these three gentlemen this morning to talk about what it means to be an American and the debate about dual citizenship and dual loyalties. In the world of politics, this has been a very combustible topic for a long, long time, like being an American and Catholic back in the days of Jack Kennedy. In more recent years, we've had Jewish Americans who have been challenged for their loyalty to this country because obviously the connection to Israel. As you consider these cases in this debate, I want to offer you what I know about how Chinese intel agencies work. The fact that they recruited Mr. Zhao, Mr. Tian, and Mr. Duan is not surprising in the least. And that's because China was their home. They were born and raised there. It was their culture, it was their language, it was their history. These men, these three men, their immediate family members and all their cousins lived back in China. And that is a gold mine of possible motivations for Chinese intel officers to find guys like these three and recruit them. Or maybe even seed these guys into our country using that absolutely ridiculous NAVME program. So it is not a trope, ladies and gentlemen, nor is it outlandish to ask if someone in this country might have dual loyalties or questionable patriotism based on, say, their dual citizenship or deep foreign connections. In fact, I promise you this morning that CIA, every single counter-intel or counter-espionage investigator, they focuses on this foreign set of connections to figure out who should get a security clearance or if there is a leak who might be responsible. So all that's true, and yet, America is a melting pot. We have people from all around the world who become part of the American family every day, and they do so fully and faithfully. So at what point do you assume that a foreigner is all in? At what point are they fully American? And what does it even mean to be fully American? So that question, and this segment actually, was prompted by not just this news of these three Chinese gentlemen, but a listener named Abraham. He was born in Taiwan and he immigrated to America, and he now lives as a U.S. citizen in California. He wrote to me last week saying that he is proud to be an American, but he sometimes struggles with wanting American foreign policy to protect his former home in Taiwan from Chinese aggression, even if that could mean there's some conflict with what is best for America. So, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow's episode is going to be free for commenting for all listeners who have a Substack account, both paid and unpaid. I want you all to reflect on this over the next 24 hours or so, and then chime in tomorrow. Now, here's the cool part. Also, a founding member of or supporter of this podcast is Jacques from somewhere in America. He is going to give 47 folks out there who are currently unpaid Substack members a 1-month free membership. He's going to do it. He's going to pay for it, underwrite the whole thing in recognition of the 47 presidents that we've had so far, especially this current one that likes them, but also just the glory that is our country. That is a really neat supporting thing for Mr. Jacques to do. So over the next day, I would encourage you to wrestle with this question that Abraham asked us. What is we've got a ton of international news, folks, including the fresh election just yesterday in Canada. And that is prompting some listeners to reach out and say, Brian, is Trump hitting Canada with the tariffs? Well, there are reasons, I promise. We're going to cover that this week. Also, we have a reported election in Romania to talk about. The major report just ruled yesterday that the leading conservative contender is not eligible to run. That is just an alarming, shocking piece of news that I assure you is going to get White House attention this week. We've also got a very sober update. We first covered it last Friday regarding Syria. At least 1,000 people were killed as the Islamist government in Damascus. They are hunting down the former members of the Assad regime. And as they did, they were ambushed. That just sparked some revenge killings of not just the former regime leaders, but also Christians and other Muslim minorities. We'll talk about that this week. Also on my radar this morning, let's ask a question. Have you wondered, what's happening with all those migrants that get blocked at our southern border? Because we talked about how some are getting to Panama and turning around. That's true, but not all of them. The LA Times is reporting that some are actually camping out in Mexico and they're waiting either to make a run for it across the border or they are going to wait until Trump is office. Wow, that is important to consider as the 2028 presidential election looms in the distance. Finally, we've got some remarkable news out of Missouri to cover this week. The Attorney General of the Shawnee State just won a multi-billion-dollar verdict against China regarding the COVID pandemic. Now that's incredible. But critically, it shows how other states can do it as well, push the Communist Party out of the entirety of America. We've got some great reporting on that from the Daily Caller. There's your Monday tease, ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this morning's episode of The Wright Report. As always, until then, I leave you with a creed of every spy and every wise American. They're the words from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 32. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Good day.
Here we go. Cold plunge is not your thing? Dive into savings with the new heat pump water heater. No money down, no credit check, low interest rate. Contact Mountain View Electric Association today to electrify and save.
Dear Coloradans, so much of what we do at CU is out of love for our state. More than we can cover in 30 seconds, but here it goes. Revolutionizing how we grow crops with less water, blocking key proteins that can help Alzheimer's, training cyber rangers to defend us from cyber attacks, designing carbon-neutral homes for underserved communities, working with rural Coloradans to become entrepreneurs, showing high schoolers how to turn their love of music into careers, creating outdoor spaces that bring Colorado communities together. See all the things CU does out of love for our state at lovecolorado.com.
Hey Siri, how many miles to Las Vegas? Yes.
was knocking back drinks at Seamus O'Donnell's Irish pub in the city center. At approximately 11:15 p.m., she walks out the door and into the street. That's the last time anyone will see her, including her 4 children. Dive teams searched the harbor and police interviewed hundreds of people, but they couldn't find a body, and there was a lack of CCTV evidence. Without a body or witnesses, the case quickly went cold. Still, detectives had their suspicions, and high on the list was Darren Osmond, a 41-year-old chef battling a serious alcohol problem. He was also the father of one of Holland's 4 children. They had broken up years before she went missing, but he was still in her life. On the night she disappeared, they'd arranged to meet, but according to Osmond, she didn't show up. In 2019, he was on a night out in Devon, and in a drunken state, he called the police. He said that he couldn't handle the guilt anymore, and when the operator pressed him further, Osmond said he knew what had happened to Holland. Detectives were soon at his house. He was obviously still drunk when he admitted, "I gave some money to someone and they had her killed." But this wasn't the first time he'd confessed. In 2014, he told